Welcome to episode 2 of, what are we calling this thing?
Fretful Dreams.
Fretful Dreams.
All things guitar.
We just saw a sneak peek of our own cover art. What did you think of that?
Oh, that thing's awesome.
Yeah,
pretty cool. Yeah.
That's my buddy Rubber Wolf, who we will hopefully have. So he's a guitarist too. He's a metal guy. So
Oh, sweet.
So at some point we might get him on here. But
Cool.
yeah, props to the art that you will be seeing on our little podcast avatar.
Yeah.
But episode 2, what are we talking about today, Randy?
well,
I guess we should should we announce who we are?
yes, we should.
Okay.
I am Randy King. I am the owner of King Electric Guitars. I'm the only person that works for King Electric Guitars. Therefore, I am King Electric Guitars, LLC. And with me, I have
Jimmy Ether, and I am a producer, co-magazine publisher for Record Plug magazine in Atlanta and Athens here, covering the music scene, and I don't know, musician mostly, business guy,
Sure. Yeah, we can all those things.
stuff, things, yeah. But
Yeah.
for the purposes of this podcast, I guess I play guitar.
Yes. Both of us are tall and have
both
gray
tall.
beards.
How tall are you?
I'm 6'3".
I thought you were taller than that. Oh, I'm taller than you then.
Yeah, you're taller than me.
Okay, I'm 6'5".
Military said I was 6'5".
Well, of course they did, because they wanted you to go be able to kill more people
Right.
with your 2 inches extra height.
I'm glad you said height there. Anyway, let's get back on track, please. So, what's our not our tropics? What's our topic today?
What's our tropics?
Yeah, what are tropics too? They're
I think today we're going to talk about amplifiers
okay.
with absolutely no preparation. So, I mean, I guess a good way to start on that is, what is your personal experience with amplifiers from, like, what was the first thing you owned? And then I'll talk about mine. And
Okay. First amplifier I owned was a Crate G10.
which is a famous amp now, right?
I guess, yeah. I mean, here's the reason why. It was, when I worked at a music store when I was in the military, I sold those all the time. They were $90 and they had a 5-year speaker warranty. I think I had 7 speakers put in that amp when I was a kid.
Really? How did you blow them?
Turned it all the way up and
So they just blew them like
yeah,
that?
I had no
Okay.
pedals, no nothing. Just turn it up and just play it, and it exploded. So I got 7 different. I had it for 2 or 3 years before I went to the Air Force, and then I got my first big boy amp, which was a PV Bandit.
Okay.
PV Bandit all the way.
Bandit was a solid state one, wasn't it?
Yeah, solid state. Yeah. So, but yeah, first amp was Crate G10. And my dad went in halvesy with me. He had 2 or 3 acoustic guitars. I'd been playing guitar for, I think, 2 years. And he said, okay, if you'll pay half, I'll pay half.
What was the guitar? What was the first guitar?
I'm trying to remember. It was a Strat copy.
Okay.
I'm wanting to say GTX just because that fits in my head, but I don't think it was. But it's basically the same as a GTX Strat copy.
Right.
And I wanted an Explorer. He said no. I was in Macon at the time. And I wanted a Flying V. And he said, no, you can't play either one of those. And they were both Honors. So we ended up at this place, Bill Harden Music in Macon, still around.
And that's why you don't like Strats, because Strats kept you from having your Flying V.
Right. So, and then I said, okay, if I can't have any of that, I have to have a guitar. As he said, you got to be able to play it sitting down. I went to Bill Harden and I found I think it was a GTX or something like that, Series 10.
Right.
Actually, I think that's what it was a Series 10. That name just popped into my head.
Like $200 guitar, basically.
I think it was $300 by then.
$300.
But I wanted the EVH Super Strat thing, and my dad's like, no, this one has more of those things. He didn't even know what those things were. He's like, it has more of those things. That's the one you have to have. So it was a Tobacco Sunburst. It was a Series 10. That name literally just popped into my head. Series 10 Stratocaster with a maple fingerboard.
Nice.
And, it was cool. And first thing I learned to play was like American Girl or something like that. That was the first song I played on the electric guitar, thinking, ooh, look cool.
You and Lenny Kravitz.
Yeah, man. We're basically
That's
the
American
same.
Woman. Wait a minute, American.
Yeah.
Oh, you're talking about American Girl.
Right,
now.
Tom
We're talking
Petty.
Tom Petty.
Right.
I
I
just
don't know.
watched the Tom Petty documentary on Wildflowers. It's actually really good.
Yeah.
Did you ever see that?
I have not.
It's very, very good. It's on Amazon Prime, I think.
Mm.
But so my first amp was also a crate. It was not a G10 though. It was probably the cheaper version of that, like a lesser version of that. But it was like a little practice amp.
Yeah.
But I know that we didn't pay $90 for it. Probably it was like $50 brand new
Right.
at this little music store that used to be like walkable to my house down the street in Mableton. And then the guitar was a Kramer. You'll know better than me which model actually.
I'm wanting to say Pacer, but that may be a Peavey, but I think Kramer had a Pacer as well.
It's something like that. I can't remember what model it was, but it was like a black, Floyd Rose
Super Strat
Eddie Van Halen Kramer, that I had for years when I was learning. And that was my first amp. And my first real amp was I was working at McDonald's and mowing lawns for a year when I was 15. I was working a grill illegally at McDonald's because I looked big and older. So, the very, very scrupulous owner of that McDonald's was like, put him on grill. Let him burn himself.
Mm-hmm.
And also had us tarring the roof at 15 as well. Those were the days.
Yeah, sure.
But I bought my Marshall JCM 800 half stack. I saved up $1,500, which was like, might as well have been $1 million.
Right. Yeah.
And bought a half stack at age 16. Stuck it in my bedroom for a few months, and then started looking for bands to play with.
See, you at age 16 had the rig that I end up with, because that's what I'm playing through.
I had a 100 watt, but yeah, you have a 50 watt JCM.
Yeah, 1983 JCM 800 50 watt.
You got a better year. I think mine would have been a 90. What was that? That would have been a 91-ish or something.
Was it an 800 or 900?
It was 800. No, I guess it would have been an 80. No, mine would have probably been a 89 or 88.
Yeah.
Something. It was late 80s.
Because I had a 900 before I bought my 800.
Did you?
I
never liked the 900.
I never bought it. Let's just put it to you this way. A guy, we put out, me and friends of mine put out a label. It was called Sex Sales Records, and we put out a compilation CD. And one of the bands that was on it, they decided not to pay us their share of the cut, and got all their CDs and everything else. So I was sharing a practice space and found out it was those guys. So I just loaded up the JCM 900. And well, actually, that's a lie. I didn't even do it. I looked at the guy and was like, "You owe us money until you come up with $1,500. This amp is mine now. Don't even look at it." And I guess it was one of those days where he thought I was being serious. So I ended up with the amp. But he did do something ridiculous, which was turn it on 3 days before I got there. So that amp ran for 3 days. For about 10 minutes, it was the best sounding amp. And then that was the only time it sounded good. So, yeah.
So the tubes are fried, I would know.
Yeah, they were just glowing hot.
That's funny. I never was happy with the Marshall. Everybody else was, but I never was. I had a Gibson Les Paul that was like a bad era Les Paul 80. I guess it was probably like a late 80s too, 88, something like that. Not the great era of it was
right.
Not the, what do they call them?
Goodwood.
The Goodwood era.
Which is 90s, early 90s. They call it the Goodwood.
And it was
era.
like, it didn't have any weight relief in it. It literally weighed 1 million pounds. It weighed more than the Ether Master.
Jesus.
And it was just a typical standard Les Paul.
Yeah.
But, so I still have back issues from playing that. But I had that and then I ended up trading that somehow for a Fender, a silver-faced Fender Twin, and I think I got a American Strat, which was like the complete opposite direction to go from.
Right. Yeah. You went a completely different way.
And did that for a while. And this was always straight into the amp. So imagine going straight into the Twin, that silver-faced Twin with a Strat at full volume.
Yeah.
it was pretty gnarly, pretty bright.
Right. You've always, it seems, I could be wrong, but you've always been in bands where loudness was kind of your thing, correct? You always turned up really loud.
Not always, but I mean, like to the drummer.
Yeah.
Like, I think that, I mean, I get in a lot of disagreements with folks on TikTok about this just for fun because everybody's always so like, oh, just get a 15-watt amp and, you know, get a Blues Junior and you'll be fine for playing any show. And I'm like, hey, there's no way you're playing without, like, you have to, everything is relying on the PA at that point, and I hate that. I would rather, like, with my bands, it's definitely like bring your sound. If we can't, like, we even do it down to the PA. Now we have a PA that will blow your head off. It's like, like 8,000 watts, I think, 4,000 speakers. Stupid, ridiculous PA. Can't even carry the speakers on it. They're so heavy. But you have to have two people. But so it's like lugging, you know, two SVT cabinet size things around, you know. But yeah, like, you know, if our amps can't get to the volume of the drummer, then what's the point? Yeah. You know? And our drummer can be loud. Like he's not loud all the time, but like when he gets loud, it's really, really loud.
Yeah, there's nothing worse to me than the sound man saying, I want you to turn way down and I'm going to put it in the monitors. Like, it sounds horrible.
And honestly, you know, as much as people bitch about that, I've only had a couple of times where a sound guy has really said to me, I mean, I remember a couple of times where they said turn down.
Yeah.
Especially early on when we didn't really know what we were doing, you know, like, we probably were obnoxious loud or something like that. But certainly not in the last 15 years. There's only one time I can remember in the last 15 years that somebody asked me to turn down. And it was clear that from the get-go that this was going to be a bad venue and like a real downer overall. And it was. Yeah. They had not done anything to treat the place. And it just was like, sounded like a warehouse.
Bouncing everywhere.
Yeah. And just terrible. And like PA wasn't strong enough, that kind of thing. So if you can't even get the vocals over the drums and stuff like that, then you got a problem. You need to be just a bluegrass club or something.
Yeah, that's something we should talk about one day is clubs and PAs, and because I've played a club that had, I wouldn't even consider it a rehearsal size PA, where the mains were actually behind us.
Yeah, they were
and it sounded phenomenal.
Yeah.
Now the gig was horrible. And we got flashed by women with no teeth, which, if that's your thing, cool. At the time, wasn't my thing. I was not. I hadn't hit my 40s yet.
No kink shaming.
Right. But if that's what you're into, cool. So yeah. But yeah,
well, I mean, that's the thing is like you guys only put vocals through it, I guess, right?
We only put vocals through it, and it worked great.
That's the thing is like when you're dealing with a small room and you got like a huge PA, just as a sound guy, like, as soon as you start putting a bunch of mics up on little amps, you've got this feedback loop coming from all the wedges and the mains and like every time we've done that, when there's two things. I think you and I have talked about this. Don't bring a tiny little amp to do the job of a big amp and expect the PA to do it, and don't bring an acoustic guitar on stage with a rock band. You know? Plug in and not expect it to howl and freak out. It's not going to go well. It never works out. I think the thing is that if you don't put everything through the PA, or you just put enough to reinforce, even if you're playing like a bigger room, you got a guitar amp on the right side, you know, you put a little bit of that amp into the left side of the PA, cool, that balances it out for the room. But you don't need to like get all of the sound support from the PA. I just think that's a dumb move. It just creates problems. So,
well, I guess we'll get into this in a little bit, but I found that sometimes the biggest sounds, especially recorded, come from smaller amps.
It's true.
You know, I mean, I was, when I was 18, I found out about the little smoky cigarette or Marshall mini stack trick where you put it in a shoebox and you make a maze for the sound to go through, and you wrap that up and you put a pillow on top of it and throw it under the bed. And when you record that to your little Tascam 4-track that I had, it sounded huge.
It's true. I mean, like, and we use little amps in the studio all the time. I mean, the difference there is that you're putting a mic up close to the speaker, which gives you a proximity effect anyway. So you're getting a little bit of a bass boost from that. Anyway, but also the speaker itself is usually a smaller you know,
Yeah.
8-inch or 10-inch speaker at least.
So your mic is picking up more of that.
Well, it's picking up more highs and mid range for
Right.
sure, and it's not able to produce those low frequency.
Right.
Some of the hardest things to record if you're not like an experienced engineer is low frequencies, and like that was my specialty. Like when you guys came to record with me, that was like, okay, we're gonna do this doom metal-y kind of. We're gonna do a doom metal version of party metal, right?
Right. Yeah.
And like we're to get a lot of low end. We even doubled some of the bass and
Right.
things on like that, and it's because like most of the time people just record a guitar and like dump all the low end off of it immediately. They're like, this is useless. It's like
You remember
you have to control it, but it's not useless.
You remember we mastered the record, and then we
Yeah.
came back and we're like, okay, let's give our ears a couple weeks. And we came back and we're like, dude, we made this too big. Like it's so big.
We did it. I don't
Like,
remember that.
Yeah, we had to cut back a little. It's like it's a little
Yeah.
too much because we were just stuck on like it's got to crush,
It's
and
gotta be
it
bigger
still
and bigger
does.
and
But
bigger.
yeah,
Yeah. No, it's tricky to balance low end, and that's like in any musical genre, low end getting that right is tough.
Well, let's get back to amps a little bit more, specifically amps. So you seem to favor more of the Fender style amps, I
Yeah.
would say.
Yeah, I do. I mean, we had this music store in town that was kind of legendary here called Midtown Music. That like half of the gear in this room came from Midtown Music probably. But I had this one amp that they had this one amp for $1,000 that I stared at for it seemed like 2 years. Every time I came in, it just was immediately drawn to it, and it was a brown panel Tremolux, Fender Tremolux, the piggyback kind, with the head separate from the cab, and it just seemed like an enormous amount of money, even though it was cheaper than my Marshall had been, but I was just still, it seemed like a crazy amount of money for this amp. But I ended up saving up and getting it somehow, or trading in and getting it. And at some point, stupidly down the road, that was the best sounding amp I ever owned. And at some point, but it was loud. It was like you had to turn it up to 6, and it really got cranking, and it sounded brilliant. But I remember playing like clubs where they were like, you have to leave. This is just crazy loud. And it was like hurting our ears, like, just too much. So when I moved here, actually, before I built the studio, I was like, well, I'm not going to have room for it to crank it up and stuff. I might as well sell it. Just biggest regret of my life, selling that amp. So now I'm on the hunt. I've always in the back of my mind been on this hunt to like get a replacement for it. But instead of getting a Tremolux, I want to get a brown face Bandmaster. And the thing about the brown face Fenders is there's like a 3-year period, 61, 62, and 63. It's the only years they made those. And depending on the model, they had different issues. Like the Tremolux that I had was a 62. The 61 Tremolux would have caught on fire. They did 200-300 of them that they recalled because they all did catch on fire. And if you find those amps, you'll find that they had EL 84s in them, I believe, is what they were like Voxes, like a Vox amp. But the power supply was a higher value power supply. Why Fender didn't realize this was going to be a problem, I don't know. But basically, it superheated everything and just caught on fire. Right. So they ended up retrofitting EL or 6v6s in there later. So you could see on that 61 of the Tremolux that they've been modified. And they sound the way they sound, which is kind of great, but they also blow transformers and would blow speakers because they didn't switch out the transformers, which were the lower value transformers. So it does start to overheat. But you get this really crazy overdriven sound with those particular like 61 Tremoluxes when they haven't been modified. They're just going to catch on fire is the only problem. Yeah, but the 62s are good for those. But the Bandmasters is like, that was considered their Big Daddy level, kind of like those were what's the other one, Concert and Super, basically all of these like 40 watt amps they considered their pro level. And the only difference mostly between the circuitry of that and anything else was whether it was a 115 or 410s or 212s or whatever, but the Bandmaster, that series had a particular kind of harmonic tremolo, this tube driven, that's just out of this world gorgeous. Like It's different than your typical tremolo. Like even in the Tremolux I had, it had a bias. You would actually see the tubes glow bright and dim, with the tremolo on, and it sounded cool. It sounded really cool, but would wear the tubes out kind of. But
Right.
but it sounded cool. They ended up going a different route with that later on with the black panel Fenders, and but for like that 3-year period, there's like this brown face sound that nobody's really captured.
It's funny because I hear a lot about the silver face, the black face, the brown face. I know enough to know what you're talking about when you talk about that, but guys who are really into the Fender amps, they know like
the tweed before that.
There's a tweed before that, and then the drip rail, and that's all. If I remember right, that's all silver face. They had one year had a rail that kind of looked down like they called it a drip rail, where the other ones don't have it. And there's it's a lot like guitars. There's different areas where they do different things. They sound differently. The whole
and the thing, like you're a big Leo Fender fan, and he was after clarity. He was a steel guitar fanatic, and he was always after clarity. So he didn't like the distortion and was always trying to get away from it. And everybody else was going to him because of the distortion sounds they were getting out of their brown face and tweed and later black face. They all have a particular kind of sound to them. The tweeds are more like that amp behind you. I don't know if we can see it on camera. Yeah, you touch that amp. No, not that one. The Night. That one. Yeah.
This crazy thing.
Yeah. I can't see your finger. There you go. That one. For our viewers, you can see my Night amp, which is a 1950s. So that's more like a TV face tweed circuit. That's actually a PA that's been modified, but it's got the same octal tubes in it, and it just breaks up in a different way. It has a weird mid-range characteristic and kind of a really fat bloom to it in the low end that is unlike anything else. And you hear it in the silver tones. You hear it from that era, like 1950, 51 silver tones will do that. Gibson, I think, had a couple amps that were octal tube that would do that as well. It's a special sound, but I used to play that out, and I got freaked out about the fact that I probably will never find tubes to replace those, and so I was like, I probably shouldn't be taking this thing out. So I use it in the studio now, but so that tweed era has a certain sound to it, that weird kind of, I think of that like Neil Young kind of like with your amp imploding kind of sound. That's more like a tweed sound. Brown faces tend to have a little more low end to them. They tend to be a little cleaner, but they still have that little breakup on the attack. But they're not like a Marshall, like the Marshall, you get really saturated like when you're running at high gain, and it kind of smooths everything out and just gets like this top end to it, that's like kind of crazy, and easy to get feedback and harmonics and stuff with. And with the Fender stuff, it's kind of different. It's kind of like all about the attack of the note. And I'm such a percussive player. I think that's why I gravitate. I think of guitar as a percussive instrument, not as a melodic one. So
yeah. And I kind of do the same way. And it's funny, I guess at one point I really wanted a Bassman. My dream
Great
rig
amps.
was a Bassman with a 212 A bead with a Marshall and a 412. That I thought you needed nothing else. And you probably really don't, especially now with as many overdrives and preamps and everything else you could put on the floor.
Sure.
And I guess this will be another topic at some point.
We can get into pedals all day long.
Do you even need an amp anymore? I love the sound. I love the feel of, but I understand why a band like Mastodon is saying, hey, we are sick of spending $300,000 just to carry our stuff across overseas, where we could literally carry everything in a suitcase and get the same tone. I get that.
And they're using earbuds.
Right. So
at that point, like it changed. I mean, but that's a totally different scale to me.
Sure.
So like I jokingly make fun of the amp modeler stuff. I have amp modelers over here that I use all the time to practice with and stuff.
Yeah.
And they sound good. I mean, they're the Universal Audio ones. I've got the Dream that sounds like a deluxe, black panel deluxe. I've got the Tweed, and I've got a Vox one over there. And they sound cool. It's just something about the decay of the note to me that always sounds a little fake. So I don't use it on a recording. You totally could get away with it in a mix, probably, especially for layering a bunch of guitars. You could totally get away with that, and people would not know.
Right.
But for my taste, there's something missing there. I don't know what it is. But with to what you're saying with Mastodon and groups like that use them, I totally understand, because they go from venue to venue that sound completely different.
Yeah.
And like the phasing issues of just hearing the mic on the amp, and did they put it exactly on the cone in the same place, and what's happening in the room, and especially if it's a big venue and you got all these weird echoes and stuff, it just makes sense, just for practicality. But that's not a musical decision, in my opinion. That's a practicality decision.
Yeah, that's true.
They're doing it for consistency and so they can hear what they're doing and put on a good performance. It's a business decision.
Right.
And it makes total sense to me. If you're trying to say that you have more fun playing those modelers than you would a real amp, I don't know. No. I don't buy that.
Because we can go in their studio right now, and if they're recording, we know they're recording amps. We know that. We know.
Oh, sure. Mastodon? Yeah.
So
they're
totally but I mean, that's what's crazy. Like, I guess so I'm 50 years old. I was born in 73.
Same.
So I went to, you went through looking at, our first amps, of course, were solid state because they were cheap. And then all we cared about was, I got to have a tube amp.
Yeah, because everybody told us.
A tube amp is when you're really, now there was some great, there's some great solid state amps been made for years and years and years and years.
Acoustic amps?
Yeah, the acoustic stuff is cool. There's so many things. And
wasn't some of the custom stuff solid state?
Yeah, most of the custom stuff
was it solid state? Yeah. Like the CCR?
Mm-hmm.
Those CCR amps, I mean, I kind of want one. Like the tones that Fogarty got out of that custom is just spectacular.
We were told you had to have, we were in the solid state era. We were told you had to have tube stuff. When I was in the Air Force, I built myself a cabinet, and I was working at a music store down in Valdosta, but they didn't have a whole lot of stuff. So I drove all the way to Atlanta, Rhythm City.
Yeah, Rhythm City.
Went to Rhythm City.
Rhythm City and Mars is what we like.
It was before Mars. It was Rhythm City. So I drove all the way to Atlanta to
Rhythm City,
to buy a Marshall valve state.
Oh, the valve state.
The valve state. Because hey, they say it sounds just like tubes, right? So I bought it.
Was that the one that had tube pre's?
But it had a tube pre. Yeah, it had one 12AX7 stuck in there somewhere.
Yeah.
But for me, I just went from a PV Bandit, and not the great PV Bandit, but like the old Blue Knob 70s stuff, which some of that stuff is amazing as well.
Yeah.
To that, and I thought, oh my God, I had carving speakers. I custom made a cabinet, and so that was my first amp. And then the store I worked at sold, and this is hilarious because you were just talking about the brown face Tremolux, right?
Tremolux is what I had, yeah.
So I bought a Crate Vintage Series.
Interesting.
And it was a 50-watt head with a 212 and 410 cabinet, whole rig. I got it for like $800. And dude, when I tell you that thing sounded amazing.
Oh, sure.
It sounded amazing. Great. It wasn't a Marshall. It was kind of a Voxy, kind of chimey, kind of.
So it was a Crate, but it was tube, or was it?
It was all tube. But it had EL83, EL84s. EL34s.
EL34s probably.
No. They're 84s.
84 is a small, like the Vox style.
The Vox style tube. So it had that Vox kind of thing. But like that Tremolux, it blew transformers at least 5 times.
Yeah.
At least 5 times it was blowing transformers. And that's when I moved from Valdosta up to here.
Yeah.
And the only people that were working on those was, what was the name of the store here?
Oh, Tina's.
Tina's.
Yeah.
So I took that amp to Tina's at least 5 times to get transformers stuck in it.
Wow.
And I wasn't even playing.
That's not cheap.
And I wasn't even playing out. It was all under warranty, but I wasn't even playing out at the time. And then I went from that to, God, I got all kind of crazy amps.
Well, I mean, my thing with solid state is, like, if a tube amp goes, this is one of my decision points with solid state, because solid state can absolutely sound good. I would say it has a different vibe and feel, and it a lot of this matters more. Like if you're playing in your bedroom or you're playing in a home studio or something and you're not recording live in the same room or practicing in the same room with a band at full volume,
Right.
a lot of this stuff doesn't matter, honestly. Like you don't even need an amp, like you said, you can use whatever. You could use plugins.
Right.
But when you get into a band situation, that solid state to me, like it's almost like it has no range. Like you turn the volume up and that's your volume, and like there's no quiet, there is no loud. It's all the same volume to me a lot of the times. Now some of them, that it depends on the brand, the model and all that, but a lot of the solid, like the PV stuff, that's what I always get the vibe from PV. I like the sound. It's good for some genres, but it's like always in your face. Right. Kind of sound. It's always there. It's always full. And once you reach that top, you're not going anywhere else. Even if you start dialing back your volume on your guitar, it's not really going to change drastically.
For me, I think that there's not the bloom. There's not the sag.
The sag is a big part for me. Yeah.
And I know these are all the same talking points,
which you can get out of pedals now. Right. So that changes things. Once you start putting these pedals in front of the solid state things, that's where a lot of these D-Class D amps and stuff, like one of my favorite bands is Deerhoof. Deerhoof they are, if you listen to their records, they're all playing through little tiny like valve amps that getting, probably like early 60s, 50s. They're playing through all kinds of crazy
Valco stuff. That
whatever they can get their hands on that sounds crazy for the song.
That is the sound of Led Zeppelin, by the way. Right. All of that is,
But when they tour, they're using solid state things they can throw in their backpack, and they sound amazing live because they've got that dialed in, and they don't have to worry about their tubes rattling around and all that stuff. Again, it's a practicality thing, and they can get those tones out, but they're using a pedal board that is able to emulate those tweedy tones and stuff that they get. And until pedals came into my mix, I would never consider a solid state amp. It's just not going to give me what I needed. But once pedals enter the picture, I'm open to a lot of things then, But still, there's this interaction between a tube amp and a guitar and pedals that it's really hard for anyone to mimic. Yeah. They can get close, but there's just little things that...
And it's all, we both kind of consider guitar a tool in a lot of ways.
Totally.
There's something to be said about, I was talking about nothing worse than the sound guy saying, turn that Marshall down and I'm going to turn it up. I don't feel it hit my knees anymore.
Right.
When I don't feel those speakers hitting my knees, I'm not inspired. Like the whole reason why I bought that friggin' amp in the first place.
It moves air.
It moves air. Like I want to feel it move air. Yeah. And when it's not, it just seems sterile. There's nothing there. And that might be the sound you're after. That's cool. I mean, look at Dimebag, for God's sakes. He played solid state stuff, but his tone was razor sharp. It was a buzzsaw, and that was what worked for him.
And he was also playing very high wattage stuff. And it was moving a lot of air,
Well, how old were you when you realized that a 50-watt tube amp compared to a 50-watt solid state amp is a much different animal?
Well, that's the thing is like tube, like when people talk about wattage, I always kind of laugh a little bit anyway, because like you can take a 30-watt AC 30 Vox.
Right.
That thing will blow your head off.
Yes.
It'll run you out of the biggest room you can possibly think. It is obnoxiously loud. The reason is because those 30 watts are only pushing above a certain frequency. Those amps are made to roll off sub-low end. So they just don't produce it.
Right.
So when you start cranking that thing, it's just driving the hell out of the mid-range and the high frequencies, and you don't get much low end out of it. And that's not what that amp's about. It's that chimey sort of like caving in on itself top end, that you hear in like, the grungier Beatles stuff and, Tom Petty and you name it, all kinds of stuff use that sound. And, but once you start talking about bringing low into the picture, people don't really understand how important that is. Like the sub frequencies are for guitar and a rock band environment and or funk or anything like that, like the low end that you're generating. If you don't feel it, it kind of gets annoying. Guitar, it can produce like some annoying frequencies in the mid range and upper range if it doesn't have that low end to it. So a lot of the wattage, when we're talking about wattage, we're really talking about how does it produce low end. We're not talking about volume. I'm not, at least.
Right.
Like, I understand the people, like, wattage becomes a real issue when you are using the amp for the drive.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you're like if you're using your Marshall and you're using it as like my sound is the Marshall with the gain cranked up, you got to get it to a certain volume for it to do what it does. But at that point, you can back your volume off and go quieter, or maybe like hit a pedal that's quieter that makes it quieter, but you can't really push it anymore without it just getting muddy, and you don't have any volume control at that point, and you don't really want it because that's the sound you're after. But you know, when you're talking about wattage with like a Fender amp or something where you're not really, you may be trying to drive it a little bit. It's like edge of breakup is what I'm usually after. Like, get the amp to the edge of breakup and then make everything going into it, make it do stuff. You know, if I want it clean, then I don't do anything. If I want it more driven, I can drive it in a bunch of different ways. And it's got the headroom, you know, to move in there.
And I think watching you do that and learning that, like, I think a lot of people don't understand that you have to learn how to play your amp as well.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I bought this Marshall. Yeah, it sounds great. And I will probably die with that damn thing.
But, you should. You should never let it go.
I would watch other people and be like, how the hell is he getting? And I would go, okay, well, number one, I turn everything to 10 on my Les Pauls and I bash. This guy's getting this because he's rolling down.
Right.
He's got his, and so I started trying to incorporate some of that stuff as well. And now I'm going to try to incorporate that more. Let's bring the gain down on that Marshall some.
Yeah.
Let's use some of the pedals. Let's do some, because I want to do some stuff that's a little more dynamic. You know, I've really been waiting to start my emo band. Did I ever tell you about my emo band I started years ago?
No. Are you serious?
Black Heart Death Surprise at the Suicide Party. I dare you to fucking out emo that. I also,
say that again, one more time.
Black Heart Death Surprise at the Suicide Party.
Awesome.
I had I'll
play drums.
My now wife was going to be in it, but I had at the time she was 9 years old. Now she's 20 something, 26. She was going to write all the lyrics. A 9-year-old girl. You cannot out emo that. There is no fucking way you're going to do that.
You just need to get
any better.
You just need to have like a rule where 9-year-old girls can submit poetry to you.
Right.
And that's it.
And that's
once
it.
they turn 10, they're out.
That's it. Like a reverse menudo.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I'm sure, do not Google reverse menudo, by the way. I don't know what may come up. Actually, someone please do and send us.
Don't send us any pictures.
No pictures, just comments about how gross was it when you Google reverse menudo.
You sure that's not what we want to call the podcast? It's reverse menudo. What were we talking about? Oh, well, so like with your Marshall, so it's a JCM 850 watt.
Mm-hmm.
Like, to me, every amp does one thing well. Like, it's got a sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
So did you find you were going past the sweet spot just because you needed more volume? Or did you find that it didn't really sounded good until you went to like the 7 or something? Like, what was your point with that amp?
As far as gain, you mean?
Yeah, as far as like gain.
If I remember right, I have 3-band EQ, and then I have gain, and I have volume.
And presence.
That's it.
So your gain, you were getting your drive tone out of
my gain, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the volume stayed at about 3 to 4 at most places.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think I probably should have turned gain down and brought volume up.
See, Sean in my band, Victory Hands, plays a plexi, super bass plexi that's been
right.
There's like one little modification you can make to turn it into a super lead. It's just basically the same amp, but
right.
It's like the Hendrix era amps.
I can't remember, but there's a
like
capacitor or something.
It's a resistor or capacitor they switch out or something. Yeah, but it's so that switch has been done to make it a super lead, but that thing is just the most glorious loud amp ever. But he turns it up to like 2.
Right.
It has no master volume.
Right.
It's literally just he doesn't do the bridging. He uses both channels and he's got a switcher, but he's got one just a little bit. It's like a hair higher than the other one, and it's just a bassier sounding channel.
Right.
So he switches between those, but then he's got a couple of drive. He's got a drive pedal that you can push into it to get a little more grit out of it.
Yeah.
Kind of a clon thing. And that's it. And that thing just produces a ton of low end. I mean, it's like percussive. When he hits a chord in that, it hits you in the chest. Part of my journey was just to keep up with that. And so that's why I started bi-amping, so I could have one amp that was sort of driven and one amp that was like a little more bassier, full range kind of thing.
See, we were talking earlier about like how did I land on an 800 was I was doing some recording, same band, Red Rocket Deluxe, and I still have this amp. I keep talking, I keep threatening that I'm going to bring and leave here for you.
Oh, the amp
It's a
This is
a Sundown.
Sundown.
And if anybody knows anything about Sundowns, this amp is ridiculously loud. It's a Sundown Rebel 100. The head is like it's
like bigger than that soft deck.
Yes, it's longer. It's longer than most 412 cabinets, which is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. But the chassis is only like the size of the chassis, like the orange.
So it's just a big box,
giant box with a chassis like this big in the middle, which is dumb as hell. So I keep saying I'm going to rebuild it.
Yeah.
But I use that as my main amp, and it was a great sounding amp, but it was so loud.
No master volume.
No. Well, here was the thing. It has a built-in like power soak, but even then it's ridiculous.
Probably a pretty primitive one too.
Yeah, right. But so I used that, and then we were trying to record, and it just didn't have the thing. As the producer at the time, he's like, it doesn't have the thing. It's good, and we're going to use it, but it doesn't do the thing. So he called his buddy, and his buddy brought an 83 JCM 800.
Yeah.
And we A-B'd, and it was like, oh, that's the tone I've always wanted.
Right.
And I've always known because, growing up in the 80s, it's the sound of the 80s.
Right.
So from then I was like, I've got to find. And one day I just happened to I had a couple bucks, and I always keep trade gear. I had bought a little guitar, and I put these tuners on it, not knowing what they were, because I worked at this at this pawn shop, and I called Discount Music. That's what I got. Discount Music.
Or Dirt Cheap. Was it a Marietta?
No, it was Dirt Cheap. You were correct.
Music.
Dirt Cheap Music. I called them and I said, I'm looking for a JCM 800. And the guy said, I not only have one, but I have the one, and you want it. And I was like, tell me about it. Does it have the Drake transformers?
Was it just the head
just the head? And I had done a bunch of research, and I knew it either was the Drake or another name that starts with D. You want to make sure it's got those transformers. So I asked a couple questions where I sounded halfway intelligent. Yeah. And the guy said, amps for sale. It's an 83. I'm thinking it's a 2203. I can't remember. It's got the sideways inputs instead of the vertical. I know the vertical is more people go crazy over, but anyway, I drove up there the next day, and I brought this little Gretsch electromatic electric guitar, and I had put a set of Grovers on it, but the Grovers had stars on the back of them.
Yeah.
He gave me $300 for that guitar. I've recently found out that those original Grover Rotomatics are worth about $500 or $600.
Well, you didn't pay that for them.
But I didn't pay that. I got those off of an acoustic guitar that I paid $25, I paid $200 for the Gretsch.
Yeah,
so
it's a wash.
Anyway, I gave that guitar and $700, and I got that amp.
Just the head.
Just the head. Years ago, I'll tell this story. I was in Valdosta again, working at this music store, and I wanted a Bassman really, really bad. And my friend Ben, who hopefully we get on the show, he's a luthier and real cool guy, store owner down in Valdosta. He said, man, I got this guy, and he'll take a Bassman and he'll gut it, and you'll have a volume knob when you're done. And I'm like, why would I want that? And then he's like, come over to the shop and I'll play you one. So
what does he mean gut it?
He did all kind of stuff, got rid of a bunch of stuff. You got rid of all your tone. You had a volume and a tone knob. That's it.
Uh-huh.
And as you turned up tone, you got more low end.
Mm-hmm.
And as you turned up volume, it did this thing. He would do this with a Trainer ABY or a Bassman.
Hmm.
I then later found out, and I could be wrong, so don't quote me, but I think I'm telling you, I'm 90% sure I'm telling you the truth. I later found out that same guy moved to Athens and started an amp company. So I'm pretty sure that was Nick Greer.
Okay.
Yeah. Which
Could have
is
been.
crazy.
Could have been. Yeah,
So,
yeah. I
But
mean,
anyway.
people have done Bassman mods forever. I think the common one is, since like the Bassman has 2 channels, but they're identical.
Right.
Like it makes no sense. So usually what they do is take the normal channel and they'll like soup it up so that you have 2 different sounding amps. That's like a common thing. But I mean, that Bandmaster that I'm after, it's basically a Bassman with that tremolo, harmonic tremolo in it. There's really not a lot of difference between those circuits. They're all pretty much Bassman circuits that have been, modified. Twin is not much different than a Bassman.
Yeah. See, I know that, if I'm correct, Marshall used a Bassman circuit to build his amp, correct?
The JTM 45 is based off of a Bassman, but what makes it different is they used EL
34s instead of
34s
instead of 6L6s.
Instead of 6L6s and then the transformer. It's British stuff versus the US stuff, but it's basically the same schematic. Yeah, and that's why that thing sounds the way it does, that JTM 45, which those are killer. If I was getting a Marshall, I'd probably get that. Yeah. Personally, because it's closer to that sound, but it's got a little bit of both. It's got a little bit of the top end histrionic kind of thing that a Marshall does. That's cool, but it's still got that Fender bloom to it. That's what I miss from when I play through a Marshall, is that kind of that smile curve, that bloom that a Fender does. I just kind of like that. But I mean, then I never really played through Voxes until a few years ago, and now I'm like, actually, I could totally play through an AC 15 or something like that, and be totally happy. That's a great sounding amp.
If you buy a Vox, I'm getting you a beret. I'm just gonna say. It's weird. I can tell you guitars. I can tell you a lot of that kind of stuff, but I'm not
a big amp guy.
I know amps, and I try to keep up with everybody's gear and stuff like that. But as far as like I can tell you what a lot of people played, but then again, some of the stuff I have no idea. So
I mean, recording for 30 years. I've pretty much stuck a mic in front of almost every amp I can think of. There haven't been a lot of them that I haven't messed with, and they all kind of solid state too, but they all have a sweet spot, and they all have a place where things start working and sounding cool. Yeah, and we did. I think when we recorded your record, didn't we bring in? You had a solid state that we brought in on some of it.
Yeah, what the crap was that? It was a.
That was before we even heard of the Josh Homme. Was that before that?
Yeah, it was a Gorilla, and I gave that amp to somebody. It was a Gorilla.
That was a nasty sounding little amp.
It had a 12-inch speaker in it. Well, this guy at work was like, "Hey man, I got this vintage amp. It's black.
It's a black vintage Gorilla.
It's black, and the plate where the knobs are black, and it's silver, and it's got a 12-inch speaker." And I'm like, "How big is it?" And he's like, "Dude," he's like, "I'm just gonna give it to you." And I'm thinking, I'm finally gonna get a Fender. Like, this is gonna be something sweet. And he shows it. No, remember that thing had a 12-inch speaker?
Was it that
huge.
big? I just remember it being small.
He showed up, and I was like, "Oh, sweet.
Nice, thanks.
Cool, thanks."
Thanks,
Sam. Yeah. And I mean, but it did. It
would be better than that Fender you got in the shop right now, though.
Oh, God, that thing's a turd. Jesus. Anybody that ever shows up to my shop, if you want to really play one of my guitars, you're going to come to my shop. Until one day I can get a few bones, bring your own amp. Just bring a little small combo that you know what it sounds like. Because right now, although we should talk about this, I've rearranged my room. My back of my house now is going to be my guitar clean room, meaning where I hang stuff up to show. I'm going to go get my amp peg that I've had.
What was a living room? Or?
It was a living room, and then we just decided to rearrange. So it's going to be a office space where people can come in. I'm going to set up some amps, that kind of thing.
Nice.
So I can have some decent sounding stuff. Because a guy came over the other day, played the guitars, and I'm like, "Man, this thing sounds so good." And then I plug it into that little.
Right.
It's like,
Yeah,
like
no, you
listening
got to have a
to
showroom. Yeah.
It's like listening to a turd fart.
Well, and you've got great amps. They're just really loud.
Right. So
yeah.
I'm going to end up and I'm not going to set my 83 Marshall up in the middle of a dusty shop,
Right.
that kind of thing. So I'm working on that now. So that'll be cool. So if
Yeah.
anybody,
I mean, there's some great, low wattage amps available now. The problem with a lot of the low wattage amps is they're still really loud.
oh yeah,
Like even that orange, I use that orange tiny, or it's a dual
dual
terror.
terror, yeah.
So it's a 1530. You can switch between 30 watts and 50 watts, or 30 watts and 15 watts. And man, like it can be obnoxiously loud depending on what you're playing through it. I was playing bass, like bi-amping bass through that and distorting the hell out of the bass through it for a while.
I would love to get a hold of some of the, when I was working at the shop in Noonan, I there was a lot of Valco era amps come through. A lot of folks don't know what those are, but basically anything that was harmony or you name it.
They're basically Supros, aren't they?
Supro, Valco, it's all the same thing.
If they're 50s era, they're like that night amp.
They were amazing.
Yeah, that's much more of a tweedy kind of sound.
And that is, so we took this Valco, plugged it in, cranked it all the way up, walked up with a plug, plugged in a telly, and started playing Led Zeppelin, and that was the tone. Like, that's the tone. That's he didn't use Marshall on that stuff. He used, and again,
honestly, dude, probably the best amp you can get like that would be just like a little Fender Princeton.
Yeah.
You get a little Fender Princeton, and there's just something about that amp. You can crank it up. It's not too loud, and it'll get that, Zeppelin-y kind of sound going.
Yeah.
And you don't have to get an old one. I mean, they have like the reissues are perfectly fine.
That, and then some of the Magnatone stuff we got there was super cool.
Dude, my favorite, like I have that Magnatone Twilighter stereo. So it's a Magnatone Twilighter stereo. So it's two 22-watt amps in one. So one for each speaker, basically. I've got it going through two 10-inch Alnico, the gold Alnico Gold Celestians.
Yeah.
Which I'm not usually a Celestian fan, but those things sound just glorious through this thing. And you turn it up about halfway, and it just starts to break up, and it's loud though. It's not a quiet amp.
Yeah,
like you can't get it quiet. But it's got that FM modulation that you can add between the two speakers.
You have to when you say that, you have to slur like lasers.
Yeah,
FM modulation.
It's got super lasers that you can.
Right.
So it's always on. I just have it all slowly, sounds like subtly like a 12-string guitar all the time. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
But the weird thing about that effect is when you play cleanish through it, you hear it. As soon as you hit distortions and stuff, it's there, but it gets more subtle, and it's just kind of this wash.
Yeah.
Really weird effect. Really weird effect that it's not like going through a pedal that would do that before you hit the amp, because it's in the circuitry of the amp. It's very, very strange, but that's So I'm playing 94 watts because I've got I'm doing bi-amp, and I've got a MIG 50 on the bottom, which I would change out with that Bandmaster eventually if I get that 60. If I find a 61, 62, or 63 Bandmaster, if you've got one for sale, let me know. But with that harmonic tremolo, I'll have the harmonic tremolo on just a little bit all the time, and I'll have that FM modulation on the top all the time, and it'll just be this some glorious
kind of weird
wash.
Head rush just thinking about that.
Well, so that's something maybe we talk about next episode. We can start next episode and go into it more. Why would I even bother bi-amping and doing all that stuff? But because that kind of gets fun, because that gets into recording. It's really all about recording, playing out live too, but mostly it comes down to recording. But
I just thought you wanted to look cool.
I do want to look cool too, but most people don't think it's cool. So.
No, it's look at this guy carrying all this crap.
What are you doing, man? You just need a $300 Fender, Mexican Fender, and a Kemper.
Yeah, right. So, stupidest gear you either traded or sold for.
Stupid, I regret it, or
to end this episode, just dumb bonehead or regret, whatever.
Oh, well, totally. Selling that 62 Tremolux because I thought I'd never be playing in a band again, and I've played more since then than I ever did like my first 15
Yeah.
years of play. Like for 2 years there, basically I didn't have a band and didn't really have a place to play because we just moved here and hadn't built the studio yet and all that stuff. And like just the lack of forethought and not knowing what I had. I mean, because I sold the amp. I think I bought it for $1,000. I sold it for $2,000 without even like looking up to see what it was worth. And the last I looked, it was like probably worth like $3,000 or $4,000. So
Okay, we should start a drinking game. We're not drinking today, but I'll have to owe you one on this one, I can guarantee. Because my stupidest gear deal, and I've done a lot of dumb gear deals, but I really wanted a clean amp. But I wanted a clean amp that I could make sound this and that and other. And at the time, I'm getting out of rock and roll, tired of doing this crap. I'm getting out, and I was taking jazz lessons. So I needed an amp that I could practice jazz, and I needed to sound good and blah, blah, blah. I traded a Marshall JCM 900 head. Now, granted, I took that head.
right.
Really didn't spend any money on it.
It was payment for what they
Right. I used my my family lineage to get that head. You know, there's some wise guys in my family somewhere. And I ended up trading it for a Line 6 Spider combo.
Hey man.
The shittiest amp. It sounded horrible. It really did. And I kicked myself for that one. But I probably would have never ended up with my 800 because I would have been like, well, this Marshall's cool.
Wow, you did that before that. So when did you get your 800?
Yeah.
What year were you?
Oh God. I got my 800
something?
I've probably had my 800 for about 10 years now.
Okay.
So, but I used.
So you hadn't had it long when we started recording.
I may have recorded one other time with that before here.
Gotcha.
And that was the album that we never really even put out because the drummer ended up leaving and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Anybody who wants to talk about revolving drummers.
No, dude, I got you beat, man.
You do have me beat on this one.
Didn't I tell you, I think we went through 13 drummers in one band.
Yeah.
Like that was in 1 year.
Jesus.
In 1 year. And it wasn't like we were firing people. They left. They left for various reasons. We did fire some of them. But I'll have to play some of that stuff. It was this band called Spiral.
Yeah.
In Atlanta that I always hated the name. But
it's a pretty crappy name. Just gonna say.
It's just a terrible name. But it was a weird band. It was a weird artsy punk band. But we went through like something crazy, like 13 drummers in one like year season kind of period. Like we basically fired a drummer and then found a great guy. Immediately his wife got a job in New York and he left.
Right.
Like we played one show with him. I don't even know if we got to play a show with him. I think we practiced and were ready to play a show with him and he left. We hired another guy just for the gig. Then we went through a bunch of other people. We finally ended up doing what I would advise everybody to do that's starting a band. Just find a friend whose music taste you like and go, here's a drum set. You're going to learn how to play drums now. And that's what we did. And that worked. And I ended up being the last drummer for that band. But
it's funny when you've been in enough bands, there's a difference. Anybody who's been in enough bands and has played enough gigs and has been through different musicians, you have talent, you have the person.
Yeah.
And if the person's talent is here, but the person is here, you're better off getting the person who is like this. Or even that their talent's not as good, but they're a good person. Because you've not been in a band, if you're young and you're listening to this, or if you've never really played in a band, and when I say tour, I've never toured the world, but I've done, weekend gigs and
weekend warrior stuff.
Weekend warrior, week stuff.
Same.
You have to live with that person. And when you're in a band, and we have went all over the place in this episode, but when you're in a band and you're lugging these amps that we're talking about, you got to get along with that person.
Yeah.
And you have to have, it's like being married to all those different people.
You got to be on the same page too. And you don't have to have the same musical taste, but you got to be able to agree on when something's good and stuff like that. And you don't get that with talent necessarily.
And if you wouldn't hang out with them if there wasn't a gig, they're probably not the right person to be in your band.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
I guess with that, that's our parting wisdom for this episode.
Parting wisdom, is that going to be a thing now?
Parting
yeah.
Shots. We should do some parting wisdom for each episode. That's today's. Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us. This has been a ramshackle conversation, which will probably be like the way we do things. But
we'll wean it in from time to time. But there's just going to be, we have a lot to talk about, so it could be a million different things in one time.
And we may, be senile and repeat ourselves over and over again, and you'll have to tell us.
That's true.
You've done this episode 5 times. What the hell?
Yes. You keep talking about the same thing.
But thanks for joining us, and, hopefully we'll talk to you guys and gals soon in the comments.
Yes. Give us some comments. Give us some suggestions. Tell us what you'd like to hear. Give us some show ideas.
Yeah.
Give Ryan food. It's after 4. He hasn't eaten yet, and he's starting to get chippy.
I'm fading.
I'm fading.
I'm fading.
I'm still seeing paint. Anyway, that's an Aqua Teen joke for anybody that got that. All right.
I don't remember that episode.
Oh, you don't remember that? It was MC P Pants.
MC P
Yeah.
Pants. Okay.
Yeah. I want candy. Bubblegum with taffy. Yeah, that one. Yeah. All right, guys. Again, we appreciate you, and see you soon.